We have a massive stack of documents on the desk today. I mean, we are looking at thousands of pages of police affidavits, court transcripts from family court, criminal proceedings, and even the actual text of recent legislative bills passed in Connecticut. It is a heavy stack, literally and figuratively.
It is a heavy case. We are looking at the disappearance of Jennifer Dulos. And while many people saw the headlines back in 2019, the documents we have in front of us tell a much more complex story. It's a story that sits at the intersection of domestic law, high-stakes forensic science, and the specific sociology of affluent Connecticut.
And our mission today for you, the listener, is to parse through that factual density. We want to move past the sensationalism and really understand the mechanics of how a life that looked so perfect on the outside, perfect high society family unraveled into a crime involving financial ruin, a frantic cover-up, and a lasting legislative legacy.
Precisely. To understand the ending, we have to understand the beginning. We need to look at the sociology of the area and the specific profiles of the people involved. This wasn't a random event. The sources suggest this is a tragedy years in the making.
Let's start with the setting and the subjects. We are talking about New Canaan and Farmington, Connecticut. These aren't just suburbs. They're symbols of a certain type of American success. Who was Jennifer Dulos before she became a name on a missing person poster?
Jennifer was born on September 27, 1968 in New York City. And looking at her background, she comes from a world of significant cultural and financial substance. Her parents were Gloria Ortenberg and Hilliard Farber. Hilliard was a banker and a philanthropist, a man of serious standing. But the connection that often gets cited in the bios and is relevant to the family's wealth is her aunt and uncle.
You are referring to the fashion connection,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Her aunt and uncle founded Liz Claiborne, Inc. For those who might not know the history of retail, Liz Claiborne was an absolute titan of the fashion industry. So Jennifer grows up in this environment of immense success, but by all accounts in the source material, she wasn't resting on those laurels. She was an intellectual.
She went to Brown University.
She did, graduating in 1990. She then went on to earn a master's in writing from New York University's Tisch School of the Arts. This is a key detail because it speaks to her internal life. She wasn't just a socialite, she was a writer. She wrote for Patch.com, she ran a personal blog. She was a person who processed the world through words.
And then we have the other side of this equation, Fotis Dulos. His background seems to mirror hers in education, but differs significantly in origin.
Fotis was born in August 1967 in Turkey, but he grew up in Athens, Greece. He moved to the United States in 1986. And like Jennifer, he is a Brown University graduate, class of 1989. He also holds a Master of Business Administration and Finance from Columbia Business School. On paper, his credentials are impeccable.
And he used those credentials to build a very specific type of career in Connecticut.
He founded the Four Group, Inc. in 2004. This was a real estate development company. But we need to be specific about what they did. They weren't building tract housing. They were building luxury speculative homes, large, expensive estates in Farmington and New Canaan. The business model here is important to understand because it relies heavily on liquidity and image. You build a massive home on speculation, hoping a wealthy buyer comes along. It requires a lot of upfront capital and a constant outward projection of success.
And before he married Jennifer, he had a life before that.
He did. He was previously married to Hilary Vanessa Aldama, another Brown graduate, for 4 years. What is interesting in the timeline is how the relationships overlapped. Jennifer and Fotis met at Brown, but they reconnected via email while Fotis was still married to his first wife.
That transition was quite fast.
Very fast. They married in Manhattan just 1 month after his divorce was finalized. They moved to Farmington, and the family grew rapidly. They had 5 children together, including 2 sets of twins. All of them were named after Greek Orthodox saints: Petros, Theodore, Constantine, Christian Kier, Cleopatra Noel.
So you have this image. The big builder husband, the writer wife, 5 children, the big house in Farmington. It is the American dream packaged in a Greek tragedy. But when we look at the documents from 2012 onwards, that image starts to crack.
The cracks are visible in Jennifer's own writing. In 2012, she posted a blog entry that is cited in almost every analysis of this case because it is so revealing. She wrote about her fear of confrontation. She said, and I am quoting from the sources here, "I wish I were a strong person and that confrontation did not both scare and appall me."
That is a significant admission to make publicly.
It is. In the context of domestic psychology, it suggests a power imbalance. If one partner is domineering and the other is terrified of confrontation, it creates a dynamic where the domineering partner can constantly push boundaries. And according to Jennifer's later court filings, that is exactly what happened. She described Fotis as living an increasingly independent life, drifting away from the family unit while maintaining strict control over it.
And that drift eventually led to the separation in 2017. But this wasn't a standard divorce filing where someone moves down the street. The move she made was drastic.
She filed at the Superior Court in Stamford, but physically she rented a house in New Canaan. We need to look at the geography here. New Canaan is about 70 miles or 110 kilometers from their marital home in Farmington.
70 miles. That is a deliberate barrier to put between two people.
Absolutely. In the dense traffic of the tri-state area, that is a significant hurdle. It signals a desire for a complete break. You don't move 70 miles away if you are hoping for a convenient 50-50 custody split during the week. You do it to put distance between yourself and a source of stress or danger.
And the divorce filings list the reasons for that stress. There were allegations of an affair.
Jennifer suspected Fotis was seeing Michelle Troconis. Troconis is a Venezuelan native who had a daughter from a previous relationship with a former Olympic skier. And the suspicion was well-founded because, effectively immediately after Jennifer left, Troconis and her daughter moved into the Farmington home with Fotis.
The atmosphere of that divorce was incredibly hostile. Looking at the notes on the custody battle, it wasn't just about money, it was fundamentally about safety.
Jennifer alleged that Fotis threatened to kidnap the children if she didn't agree to his settlement terms. She also noted a specific purchase he made in 2017, a gun. Now, Fotis claimed this was for security, which is a common defense in these proceedings. But in the context of a high-conflict divorce, the purchase of a firearm is often interpreted by the other party as a direct threat.
And while this emotional conflict is happening, there is a financial conflict happening in the background that is just as critical to understanding the motive here. The sources indicate Fotis Dulos was not the wealthy tycoon he appeared to be.
This is the crux of the pressure cooker. By 2019, Fotis was effectively broke. And he wasn't just broke, he was in massive debt to the very people he was fighting in family court. Jennifer's mother, Gloria Farber, had filed a lawsuit against him. Gloria claimed that Fotis owed the family $1.7 million.
$1.7 million is an incredible amount of leverage to have hanging over someone's head.
These were loans provided by Jennifer's late father, Hilliard, to Fotis's real estate business. Fotis tried to claim they were gifts, but the paper trail suggested otherwise. So you have Fotis facing total financial ruin, his business is struggling to maintain liquidity, he owes millions to his mother-in-law, and he is losing the custody battle.
In March 2018, the court made a significant ruling regarding the children that must have escalated things further.
Yes. Jennifer was awarded sole physical custody. Fotis was restricted to supervised visits and monitored phone calls. The court had found he violated previous orders. For a man like Fotis, who the documents suggest defined himself by control and public image, this was a total loss of status. He had no control over his money, no control over his children, and his public image as a successful family man was crumbling.
That brings us to May 24th, 2019, the day everything changed. We have a very precise timeline of this day thanks to the extensive surveillance coverage in affluent neighborhoods and cell phone data. Let's walk through that morning.
The timeline is the backbone of the prosecution's case. It begins as a standard Friday routine. At 8 in the morning, Jennifer is seen dropping the children off at New Canaan Country School. This is a confirmed, verified sighting. She is well, and she is fulfilling her maternal duties.
Then she goes home?
Correct. At 8:05 in the morning, a neighbor's security camera catches her Chevrolet Suburban returning to her home on Wells Lane. That grainy video is the last time any human being or camera confirms Jennifer Dulos is alive.
She had a busy day planned in the city. She had doctor's appointments scheduled.
She had appointments in New York City at 11 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. She missed both. That was the first silent alarm. According to friends and family, Jennifer was simply not the type of person to miss a medical appointment without calling. It was entirely out of character.
But before those missed appointments, there is movement recorded at her house.
At 10:25 in the morning, the same neighbor's camera that saw her arrive sees her Chevrolet Suburban leaving the property. But the forensic analysis of that footage by the police alleges that Jennifer is not the one driving. They believe Fotis Dulos is behind the wheel of her car.
So we have a defined window from 8:05 to 10:25, roughly 2 hours and 20 minutes. Whatever happened to Jennifer Dulos happened in that specific window.
And we have a witness who enters the scene shortly after. The family nanny, Lauren Almeida, arrives at the house at 11:30. She enters the garage and she sees something that immediately causes her concern.
It had to do with the vehicles parked there.
Right. She finds Jennifer's Range Rover still parked in the garage. This is what investigators refer to as an anomaly. Jennifer had explicitly planned to drive the Range Rover to New York City for her appointments. It was her preferred vehicle for city driving. Seeing it sitting there while the Suburban was gone made no logical sense if Jennifer had left voluntarily.
By 7 in the evening, the panic has set in. Friends cannot reach her. The nanny is worried. They officially report her missing to the local authorities.
And the police response is swift because the character witnesses, primarily her family and close friends, immediately tell police that she would never leave the children on her own. In missing persons cases, establishing that baseline behavior is vital. It moves the needle away from a voluntary disappearance to a high-priority potential crime.
When police secure and search the home, specifically the garage, the forensic evidence transforms this from a standard missing person case to a violent crime scene investigation. Let's break down what they found.
The garage told a horrific visual story. Police found blood evidence on the garage floor, on the door, on the wall, and significantly, on the exterior of the Range Rover. The pattern and volume of the blood were not consistent with a minor injury or an accident. The state crime lab determined this was consistent with a serious, violent assault.
They also processed the interior of the home, specifically the kitchen.
In the kitchen, they found blood on the sink faucet. They ran a DNA analysis on that specific blood sample. The result was a mixture. It contained DNA from both Jennifer Dulos and Fotis Dulos.
That mixture is a critical piece of evidence. It places him physically at the scene, in contact with her blood.
It creates a forensic link that is incredibly difficult for a defense attorney to explain away innocently, especially given the history of the divorce. The police theory, based on the totality of the evidence, including tire marks found at the scene, is that Fotis lay in wait. They believe he arrived at the New Canaan home on a vintage bicycle. They found tire tracks consistent with a specific type of bike. The theory is he waited for her to return from the school drop-off, attacked her in the garage, and then used her own Suburban to transport her body away from the immediate scene.
And we know the route the Suburban took because it was recovered later.
It was found abandoned near Waveney Park in New Canaan, which is about 3 miles from her home. This suggests a secondary transfer took place. The logistics are complex. Arriving on a bike, leaving in the victim's car, abandoning it at a park. It points to a heavily premeditated operation.
But the most shocking evidence, the evidence that really captivated the public and solidified the case for the prosecution, came from a city an hour away. We need to talk about what investigators call the Hartford Run.
This is truly the smoking gun of the entire investigation. On the evening of May 24, around 7:30, which is the exact same day she vanished, surveillance cameras in Hartford, Connecticut pick up a Ford Raptor truck. Inside that truck are Fotis Dulos and Michelle Triconis.
They are driving along Albany Avenue in Hartford.
And they aren't just driving through, they are making a series of highly suspicious stops. Over a 4-mile stretch of road, various cameras capture them stopping at 30 different public trash bins.
30 bins. That is frantic behavior.
Yeah.
It shows a massive effort to disperse material over a wide area.
It is the textbook behavior of someone desperate to fragment physical evidence. They are taking garbage bags from the bed of the truck and dumping them into municipal bins. Police, working backwards from the camera footage, were incredibly fortunate to recover a number of these bags before the city garbage trucks came to empty them.
What exactly did the crime lab find inside those recovered bags?
It was a forensic treasure trove for the state. They found clothing that was heavily stained with blood. They found cleaning supplies, specifically mops and sponges that were soaked in blood. They also found zip ties.
And the DNA profiling on those items.
The blood on the clothing and the cleaning supplies matched Jennifer Dulos. But perhaps even more critical for building the case against Fotis, his DNA was found on the inside of a glove that was recovered in one of those very same bags. So you have his DNA inside the glove and her blood on the items directly adjacent to it. It ties him physically and undeniably to the disposal of the evidence of her murder.
Despite this overwhelming physical evidence of a cleanup and a violent assault, there was still no body. The search efforts launched by the state were massive.
They utilized every resource available. They searched multiple locations across the state. They drained ponds in Farmington. They systematically searched the woods in Fairfield County. They scoured Waveney Park with specialized canine units and dive teams. They also monitored all digital and financial activity. But there was absolute silence. No credit cards were used. No cell phone pings were registered. Jennifer Dulos had simply ceased to exist on the grid.
This brings us to the first wave of arrests. The police moved methodically. In June 2019, they arrest Fotis and Michelle Troconis at a hotel in Avon, Connecticut. But they don't charge them with murder right out of the gate.
No, the initial charges were tampering with evidence and hindering prosecution. This is a standard strategic move by prosecutors. You arrest suspects on the crimes you can prove immediately, which in this case was the dumping of the bags on Albany Avenue. This gets them into the system, sets bail conditions, and restricts their movement while investigators continue to build the more complex murder case. Both Fotis and Troconis pleaded not guilty to these initial charges.
The major escalation in the case happened months later, in January 2020.
That is when the state's attorney brought the severe charges forward. Fotis Dulos was formally charged with capital murder, murder, and kidnapping. Michelle Troconis was charged with conspiracy to commit murder. And then, a third figure enters the narrative in a major way. Kent Douglas Mulwiney.
Mulwiney was a friend of Fotis.
He was a friend, and he had also served as his former civil attorney in various matters. He was also charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Mulwiney's background is incredibly dark when you look at the records. At the time of his arrest, he was estranged from his own wife, who had previously accused him of spousal rape. She had actually gone to the police in South Windsor, terrified that Fotis Dulos and her husband, Mulwiney, were actively plotting against her.
And there is a piece of physical evidence linking Mulwiney to the Dulos investigation that is deeply unsettling: the discovery of the grave.
In August 2019, two members of a local hunt club were walking on a secluded piece of property that Mulwiney owned in East Granby. They found an area of disturbed earth in the woods. When investigators excavated it, it was a shallow grave. Inside, they found 2 bags of lime and a blue tarp.
From an investigative standpoint, what is the significance of the lime?
In criminal lore and sometimes in practice, lime is used to accelerate the decomposition of a body and to mask the odors associated with decay. The grave itself was empty, but the working theory of the police is that this hole was dug in advance, in preparation for hiding Jennifer's body. For reasons we may never fully know, whether the plan went wrong or the timeline was simply too tight on the day of the murder, it wasn't used. But its mere existence speaks volumes about the level of premeditation involved.
The family released a statement after these murder charges were announced. They expressed relief, but they made a point that really anchors the reality of this case. They stated clearly that there is no closure without Jennifer.
That was their core message. The legal victory of an arrest, or even a conviction, doesn't solve the emotional void of the loss. 5 children were still without their mother, and her location was still a mystery.
The stage was set for a massive, high-profile trial. But then the narrative took a sudden turn that ended the possibility of a courtroom reckoning for Fotis Dulos himself.
We need to look at the events of January 28, 2020. Fotis is out of jail on a massive $6 million bond. But there was an emergency bond hearing scheduled for that specific Tuesday afternoon. The issue was technical. There were serious questions raised about the actual value of the real estate collateral that had been used to secure the bond, but the consequence of that technicality was very real. The bonding company was preparing to revoke it. Fotis was looking at a near certainty of returning to a jail cell that very afternoon.
He never arrived at the courthouse in Stamford.
He didn't. When he failed to appear for the hearing, police conducted a standard welfare check at his home in Farmington. They found him unresponsive in the garage.
He had taken his own life.
The method was carbon monoxide poisoning. He had taken a vacuum hose and connected it from the exhaust pipe of his SUV directly into the interior cabin of the vehicle. First responders initiated CPR and managed to restore a very faint pulse. He was airlifted to Jacobi Medical Center in the Bronx, which has specialized facilities for hyperbaric oxygen therapy, the standard trauma protocol for severe carbon monoxide poisoning. But the anoxic brain damage was simply too severe. He was officially taken off life support and pronounced dead on January 30th, 2020.
This left the prosecution in a highly unusual and difficult position. The primary target of the investigation was gone.
The criminal case against Fotis Dulos was entered as nolle prosequi, which essentially means the state drops the charges due to the death of the defendant. This shifted the entire weight of the legal pursuit squarely onto the accused accomplices, Michelle Troconis and Kent Mawhinney. The massive questions of what exactly happened in the garage and where Jennifer was taken now had to be answered through their trials.
Let's examine the trial of Michelle Troconis. For years, she maintained her innocence.
She did. Her defense strategy centered on the claim that she made a terrible mistake in trusting Fotis, but she fundamentally lacked any knowledge of the murder plot. She admitted to being in the passenger seat of the truck during the Hartford run on Albany Avenue, but she claimed she was completely unaware of what was actually inside the garbage bags Fotis was throwing away. However, the jury looked at the sheer volume of circumstantial and physical evidence. They looked at the alibi scripts that police found, which appeared to be coordinated timelines. They looked at her involvement in cleaning the vehicles. They looked at her presence in the truck during the disposal. And they ultimately did not believe her defense.
The trial finally concluded in 2024.
And the verdict delivered by the jury was guilty on all 6 counts: conspiracy to commit murder, tampering with physical evidence, and hindering prosecution. In May 2024, the judge sentenced her to 14.5 years in state prison. It was a substantial sentence that clearly reflected the court's view of her direct role in facilitating the cover-up of a brutal crime.
And what about Kent Mawhinney?
His legal journey also concluded with a conviction. According to the case records, he was sentenced to 11 months in prison. This lighter sentence likely reflects the specific nature of the conspiracy charges he faced, or the resolution of a plea arrangement, compared to the direct, hands-on involvement in evidence disposal that Troconis was convicted of.
Through all of these proceedings, the arrests, the suicide, the trials, there remained the lingering legal question of Jennifer's actual status. For a very long time, she was classified officially as a missing person.
In Connecticut, similar to many other states, the law requires a presumption of life for a period of 7 years. You generally have to wait out that 7-year clock before a court will declare a missing person legally dead. The family's legal team attempted to accelerate this timeline in 2020 in order to settle her estate, but the probate court initially denied the request. They were forced to wait.
But that legal status was finally resolved recently.
In October 2023, the probate court reversed course and granted an expedited ruling. The judge cited the absolutely overwhelming forensic evidence of her death, specifically the volume of blood found in the garage and the medical examiner's assessment that it represented a non-survivable injury. Importantly, the judge also cited the urgent need to protect the children's financial interests. Glory Farber, who took custody of the children, is elderly, and formally settling the estate was deemed necessary to secure the children's future. Consequently, Jennifer Dulos was declared legally dead.
But her physical remains are still missing. The location of her body is still unknown.
That remains the open wound of the entire case. Police have never officially stopped looking. In January 2021, state police returned to search a specific property on Mountain Spring Road in Farmington. They brought in heavy excavators and specialized septic tank equipment. They were acting on historical leads tied to Fotis' construction projects, but after extensive digging, they found nothing.
While the criminal prosecution phase of this story is largely closed, the legislative impact of this case is permanent. This tragedy directly changed the laws in the state of Connecticut. We need to look closely at Jennifer's Law.
This is perhaps the most enduring legacy of the case. Jennifer's Law was passed by the state legislature in May 2021 and officially signed into law by Governor Ned Lamont. The legislation is named in honor of 2 victims, Jennifer Dulos and Jennifer Magnano, who was another Connecticut resident murdered by her husband in 2007 in front of her own children.
What does this law actually change in terms of legal practice?
It fundamentally rewrites how the state defines domestic violence in the family court system. Historically, the legal system required visible proof. It looked for physical bruises, it looked for broken bones or hospital records. If a victim couldn't show physical bodily injury, it was incredibly difficult to obtain a protective order or to have abuse factored into custody outcomes. Jennifer's Law officially expands the legal definition of domestic violence to include the concept of coercive control.
Can you define coercive control for us based on the text of the law?
Coercive control is defined as a strategic, ongoing pattern of behavior designed to completely strip a person of their autonomy and liberty. It is not just having a bad argument. It involves isolating the victim from their support network of friends and family. It involves controlling every aspect of the household finances, so the victim literally cannot afford to leave. It includes monitoring their daily movements, often using digital technology or tracking devices. It includes making credible threats to harm the children or even family pets to ensure compliance. It is the systematic building of a psychological and logistical cage around the victim.
When you list those behaviors, it sounds exactly like the environment Jennifer described in her 2012 blog post and in her later court affidavits.
It maps perfectly onto the dynamics of the Dulos case. The documented fear of confrontation, the financial domination by Fotis, the specific threats of kidnapping the children if she didn't comply with his demands. Under the old legal framework, a judge might have dismissed those complaints as standard marital strife or the typical posturing of a nasty divorce. Under Jennifer's law, this pattern of behavior is legally recognized for what it is: abuse. It mandates that judges must consider these factors when making decisions in custody hearings and when issuing restraining orders.
So the practical hope of this legislation is that a family court judge today, reviewing a case with the same early warning signs as Jennifer's, would have the legal authority to intervene long before the situation reaches a violent, fatal conclusion.
Exactly. The goal is to legally recognize that domestic violence often begins long before the first physical punch is ever thrown. It always begins with control. By addressing the control, the state hopes to prevent the violence.
The media coverage of this case was relentless from day one. Dateline broadcasts, investigation discovery documentaries, even a Lifetime movie. Based on the sociology we discussed at the beginning, why do you think this specific case struck such a massive nerve with the public?
I think it fundamentally challenges our cultural assumptions about safety and domestic violence. There is a pervasive, comforting myth that domestic violence is an issue confined to certain socioeconomic brackets, that happens somewhere else to other people. When the public sees it happen in a massive mansion in New Canaan involving Ivy League-educated professionals with immense wealth, it completely strips away that denial. It forces society to acknowledge that domestic violence is a universal human issue, driven by power and control, that completely transcends wealth, education, and zip codes.
It leaves us with a very heavy picture to process. 5 children who are growing up without either of their parents. A grandmother stepping in to raise them in the aftermath of immense trauma. A central mystery that may never be fully solved regarding the final resting place of Jennifer's remains.
It is a tragedy that serves as a grim but vital case study for law enforcement and legal professionals. We have the forensic answers. We know who committed the crime. We have a very clear picture of how it was orchestrated, and the family court documents explain exactly why it happened. But without the recovery of the victim, the narrative for the family and the public always feels painfully unfinished.
We've covered the timeline, the forensic science, the complex legal battles, and the resulting legislation. It is a dense and difficult case, but an incredibly important one to understand. I want to leave you with one final thought to consider. We live in an era of unprecedented surveillance. Cameras, digital footprints, GPS data. These tools unravel the cover-up of this crime in a matter of days. Yet, despite all of our modern technology, the oldest and most fundamental human mystery where a person is hidden can still evade discovery. Thanks for listening.